it became that when he would get into a rage, he would start saying, I'm at war with you, and I'm not going to stop fighting until I'm dead or you're dead. And I kept trying to break it down and say, but why? You love me to the end of the earth, so you claim. Why are you at war with me? And then he started seeing me as the enemy. I became the enemy. It took me a long time to fathom that, because I just couldn't fathom that love could get there. My name is Megan. I live in New York City, currently in Brooklyn, but during my case I was living downtown in Lower Manhattan. And I'm very committed to speaking out about domestic violence because I like to talk about the warning signs of domestic violence. I was with my husband for 12 years. I was very, very aligned creatively. You know, we were both creative professionals. I'm a television professional. My husband, you know, was a commercial director and a photographer. We had projects together. We made, you know, films together, you know, but I also worked television and he also worked in commercials, and we were very, very aligned. We really wanted to build a family together. He was very devoted to me. He was devoted to, you know, our children. So all of those things are the reasons why you build this foundation of love and trying to build something that is really, really hard to confront and to potentially walk away from. In my case, the patterns, the anger and the aggression built up very slowly over many years. It just started as like a push. And I remember it started when I was pregnant with my son. So it was about 7 years into our relationship. And at that time, he was shocked at his own violence, and he said, I said, you just pushed me. And he said, oh my God, I just pushed my pregnant wife. Like, what was that? And he was remorseful, regretting. So the changes for me over time happened when the shoves would become a little harder. Then the shoves over time became, as I mentioned, no, you're just exaggerating. I didn't push you that hard. You're trying to make me look bad. You're pushing yourself backward. You fell into the furniture, not me. Things began to very slowly first and then very quickly escalate. And they began to escalate. Yes, we had a lot of stress around work and we were trying to build a company together and projects together, and you know, but the control tactics became more. The more I grew in my career, I was the breadwinner the entire time, and I started getting very good projects, very, you know, high status projects, and I felt bad for him because I felt for his ego, but he also tried to use that against me or tried to control. He made a lot of threats against my work. He would sometimes call incessantly, text me incessantly, you need to come home right now, you need to do this, you need to do, while I'm working and making money for our family. So the control tactics started getting almost like, I thought they were just childish. You know, he wanted to punish me for not doing what he wanted by trying to steal my wallet when I would the one had to go to work, so I couldn't have money to get lunch just so that I would be embarrassed. You know, saying you have to leave work now to go pick up the kids because I'm angry at you and you deserved this and you created this problem and I'm not going to pick up the kids. So if you don't want to be embarrassed by having the school call you, you know, you've got to leave work now because you have just enough time. You don't have time to get a babysitter. Like, do things to try to mess with me. In my case, the violence for the majority of the time was just pushes. There was one time that about a couple of years before it went to a crescendo, where it turned over into real violence, where all of a sudden, and I forgave it because that night he wasn't a huge drinker, but that night he was drinking, and he strangled me. He strangled me and he bashed my head against the ground. And I had been strangled so hard that I couldn't even speak. And I thought at that point, I'm not going to call the police, because in New York City it would require the police ringing the doorbell and waking the children up, and I thought all of that chaos was going to be so much that I couldn't even fathom what his reaction would be. And so I avoided it, I shut it down, I hid it, and I hid it so much that I hid it even from myself. I started maybe about 8 months, 6 or 8 months before the crescendo of my situation, realizing, okay, this is not okay. A lot of it has to do with kids, with the kids asking questions. And again, in my case, all they pretty much saw was pushes. So previously, when my kids would say, well, why did Papa push you? Why did he do that? I would excuse his behavior. I would say, well, he did it because he was angry, because he lost his temper. And that was justifying it. His patterns of rage continued to escalate much more often. And in his case, he would get into a rage, and he would rage for hours. And it would be the anger, the controlling, whatever you want to do. So you get into this phase of just saying, okay, I'm just going to do whatever I need to do to get through this. And in his case, it was mostly rage. There would be violence. Sometimes he would break things, throw things. There were times, and again, I was denying a lot of the violence that was there. Most of it was pushes for a very long time. In those last 6 months, it became, at one point, he took an iPad and he bashed me over the head with an iPad. We were working on a project together. It was me, the lead on the contract, but we were trying to name our company on it, and he was associated with the company, but the person I was working with was really working with me, but I was trying to add into the contract that it was our company that we were making the contract with, which my husband was demanding, because he wanted to also gain from that. He wanted to be part of it. So the guy sent a contract in, 8 o'clock in the morning, sober, no alcohol, nothing involved. So those excuses I made in my brain to myself started to fall away. And all of a sudden he saw that this man had sent a contract and my name was on it, but not our company name. And immediately my husband went into a rage. You're trying to cut me out of it. Why am I not in there? And he picked up the iPad and he began bashing me over the head with the iPad. He had an idea for a new photography series that was deep in the desert, in the Sahara Desert. And I was like, great, let's do it. I think that's going to be really good for you. And so we planned this trip for him to go deep into the Sahara. About a week before he left on his trip, he had won a photography award. I was on hiatus from a TV show, so I wasn't working at the time. So I went, I dropped my kids at school, I came back, and he said, oh wow, I just won this photography award, and he'd been posted in some journal in the UK. And I said, wow, that's amazing, that's fantastic. Let me post it on Facebook. What I didn't remember was that the day before, he had been in a rage, and he had threatened to publicly humiliate me with all of my colleagues to try to get me to do what he wanted to do. So at this time, I went in the day before, I'd gone in and I'd surreptitiously changed all of my Facebook settings so that, because he had access to my email, he had access to my Facebook, he had access to everything. And I had surreptitiously changed it so that anything was posted would be private, not public. But in the stress of that moment, I'd forgotten that I'd done that because I was in survival mode. I was just trying to get it so that he wouldn't do something that would publicly humiliate me. And when he won the award, I posted it, but I forgot that I'd set my settings that nobody could see it. So he was on the other computer and I was on my laptop, and I said, I posted it. And he said, no, you didn't. I said, yes, I did. It's right here. And I turned the computer around to show him my post, and he grabbed my computer, smashed it to the ground. He went to the desk, he picked up something from the desk. It was a wooden letter holder. He hurled it at me so hard that it hit my leg. It gashed my shin through my pants. And I was shocked because it hurt so hard. I thought he'd broken my leg. It was so hard. I really thought my leg was broken. And I looked up at him and I said, "What did you just do?" And I caught one look in his eye. And I'd never seen that look before. His eyes went completely black. And I said, "He's going to kill you right now. You have to get out." So I came home later that evening, and he was still in a rage. I'd been texting with him all day long, telling him how he needed to get a handle on this or else he was at risk of losing our family. And I came home, and that night was the second time that he strangled me. He got into a rage. He was still in the rage over the Facebook post. He said, "You're lying to me." He shoved me onto the bed, he pinned me on the bed, and he started to strangle me. And he also simultaneously with his other hand, with one hand and with his other hand, he said, "You confess that you're lying or I'm going to gouge your eyes out." And he was on me and he was ready to, and he was strangling me so hard I couldn't speak. And then my daughter, who was 8, ran in and she screamed at him. And she said, "Don't kill Mama." And he let go. I waited the week, and I kept saying, just wait the week until he's on the plane, figure out what to do. When he got on the plane, it took me about a day to collect myself. And I thought, I need to get him help. I went first to the court. I walked down to the family court, and I thought, I'm going to get him forced into a batterers treatment program. That's the way that's going to help our family. And I ran into somebody outside the court who happened to be from Safe Horizons. And she said, "Well, do you have any proof?" And she said, "Well, it's going to be your word against his. So you might want to get some proof. It's going to be really hard to get him forced into anything if he has no record. So why don't you maybe think about filing a police report?" The next day I walked into Precinct 1 and I said to the officer behind the desk, and mind you, this is the first time I told anybody. I remember his name. His name was Officer Sanzari. And he was behind the desk, and I said, "I want to file an incident report for domestic violence." And he said, "Okay." And he had me fill out the report, and he also gave me a danger assessment questionnaire, which is vital in my case. Because at the time, there were 20 questions, and I answered yes to 18 out of 20 questions. And the officer was so good because he put down the papers and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Do you have any idea how much danger you're in? I'm going to work with you. What you have to do is get him back into the country. We can't arrest him until he's back in New York City." And he was going to work with me to pick him up. He said, "But you have to be the one to pick him up from the airport." He said, we can't arrest him, it's out of New York City jurisdiction. And the main thing is, you need to keep track of him at all times. You've got to make sure you get him back into New York City jurisdiction so that I will be there to meet you wherever you want to get him arrested. I had a plan. The officer said, you're going to have a restraining order, so you've got a plan to live separately from him. I thought the way to keep myself safe and the kids safe while he has a restraining order, while he's going through a treatment program, which was estimated to be 6 months, was the only person who I would trust to keep me safe would be his mother. So I said, okay, I'm going to have to tell his mother, I'm going to fly her in, I'm going to get them an apartment. I'm going to get them an apartment because I was the only one who was making money at the time. I said, I'm going to get them an apartment, him and his mother, I'm going to fly her in. And that was really a protection for me because I said, I need somebody to keep track of him at all times. So I called his parents. When I told his mother, she said, okay, well, I'll be there, I'll do it, but you have to tell him. You have to tell him he's facing arrest. And I realized at that point, if I didn't tell him, she would. So he was deep in the Sahara. He had another day before he was coming back into reception zone. So we finally came back in, which was like 2 days before he was supposed to fly home, or a day before he was supposed to fly home. He came back into cell phone reception, and that's when I told him that I had gone to the police and that he was facing arrest and that he needed to do this if he wanted our family to be whole. If he didn't go through the treatment program, there was no future for our family. He then, every control tactic from afar came back in again. I've already hired a hitman. A hitman's gonna come get you. I'm going to sneak back into the country through Canada. I'm gonna take the children and I'm gonna take them so far away, somewhere in the world, that you are gonna spend your entire days searching the world for your children, and I'll be happy because I know you're in agony. The level of where he got to was pretty crazy. And I kept thinking, well, it's just all crazy. And he even said, if you don't go back to the police and take this back, if you don't go back and say, I refuse to testify in his case, if you don't go do that, and that's when all the threats came in. If I'm gonna have to spend any jail time, I will, with my teeth, rip my veins out of I will kill myself by ripping my veins out. He missed one plane, then because he had more demands, I'm not gonna get on a plane until you do this, until you do that. And at this point, I had the officers calling me, where is he coming, what's he gonna do? I did go back into the police station and say, you guys have to drop this case. You have to drop this case. Like, there's no way he's gonna come back, you have to drop it, I can't testify, da da da. And he, again, the same officer, I went and when he was there, the same officer said to me, you're protecting the man who's hurt you over and over again. Why? Why? And those words had such an impact on me because I didn't have an answer as to why. I wanted him to get better, was why. But what I was doing was only helping him not face accountability. I finally said, when the officer told me, you have to focus on protecting yourself, I said, okay. And that's when my thinking started to really shift. And I stopped giving in to his demands just to keep him safe. I had been negotiating with him the last day before he came home, before the second flight home that he'd missed, the new flight. I had been negotiating with him. He said, I just need to see you and the kids. He said, okay, I'll do this. I'll do all of this. I will come home, I will face this. He was negotiating with his mother. Yes, we will come home. She's flying in this day, the same day I am. We're gonna fly in, I'll be there. I just need to see you. I just need to see you, and I need to see the children. I just need to hug them once, because I'm not gonna see them for 6 months. You have to give me that. And so I told him the whole plan. I'll pick you up from the airport. I will take you home. I will take you to the house, and I will let you hug the children, and the police will then come. He said, just give me, first it was give me a day, give me a week. The week shrank to a day, the day shrank to an hour. I'll get to see my children, for an hour. And I started taking away giving in to fewer of his demands, the more his demands rose. So up until the day before he was coming home, I had been negotiating with him to pick him up from the airport, bring him home. He could see the kids for an hour, and then the police would come, or then he would go turn himself in. But as his demands kept rising and his threats, I finally said, no, you don't get to see the kids. I'm gonna pick you up from the airport, and we're gonna go right to the police station. And that's it. I signed off. I said, I need to sleep. I'm exhausted. This is just the first battle of many to come. I've got to get my sleep. I'm going to take the kids to school in the morning. I woke up in the morning and he had missed his flight again. I called the hotel. They said, he's sleeping. I said, okay, well, he's sleeping. All right, he missed his flight. All right, let me figure it out. That was in the morning before I took the kids to school. I took the kids to school. I came back and I called the hotel and they said, your husband's dead. He had jumped out the hotel window. And not until he killed himself did I realize
how intent he was on ultimate destruction. And that if I had let him into our home to hug me and the children, he would have killed us all. I share my story now because all of the warning signs were there, and I kept avoiding them for a very, very, very long time. If somebody says they're going to kill you, believe it. If somebody says they're going to kill themselves and kill you, that's even far more dangerous. The ones who are ready to kill themselves over it have nothing left to lose. There's something also that I like to talk about, in that cases that do end up becoming deadly are often not the most violent ones. They're sometimes the ones that have the most coercive control. And coercive control is when somebody starts controlling the actions, being emotionally manipulative, psychologically manipulative. Early in our relationship, he would say something that was really simple, like, if you ever cheat on me, I'll leave you. That's rational. By the end, he started saying, if you ever cheat on me, I'll kill you, which is obviously not rational. The last couple months, the talk about the threats and the death threats started becoming constant. The biggest predictor of lethality is the threat to kill. There are a few things that I would say with new officers coming in. The dynamics of domestic violence cases can be very complex. My case illustrates to what lengths I was willing to go to protect my husband, which is why it can be very dangerous for officers to respond to a domestic violence case, because the bond of love with the survivor is really hard to break. They're not ready to face it until they're ready to face it. That's number one. Number two, they might not be ready to get out because they might not feel safe enough. They might not have their ducks in a row. Like, I wasn't even trying to get out. I hadn't even gotten to that point because I was still so focused on saving him that I didn't even know that I was trying to save him at my own peril. The other thing that the officer did really well is he said, one of the things that makes me know how much danger you're in, not only the pattern of the things that he did, like the strangulation and the look and trying to kill you and threatening to kill you and threatening to kill himself and threatening your children and all of these patterns and the coercive control. He said, also, I look at you and I see how much fear you're in that he'll find out. And he said, the level of your fear for walking in here is so high that makes me know how serious this case is. And he also gave me a danger assessment questionnaire, which is really crucial. And I scored 18 out of 20. I answered yes to 18 out of 20 questions, which to the police officer made him realize how dire my situation was. He could see what I wasn't willing to admit to myself. And he took the time to say, I don't want you to end up in a body bag. The reason why it's really important for me to speak out is that my case did end up ultimately becoming a deadly case. And I like to speak about all the warning signs that I missed, but there are also warning signs that can help other people to see some of the trends that were there from the beginning that I didn't even notice, and especially during the time of intense escalation. This is important to mention because in cases that do end up sometimes deadly, when the perpetrator is in a situation of losing their family or feeling like they've lost their family, that's the most dangerous time for survivors. By the time I went to the police, to when he was dead wasn't even a week. I want to tell other survivors, that if they see that if any of this rings true, pay attention to all of this. And especially I want to tell officers the power they have in helping survivors see the danger, the severity of their own of their situation that they might not be willing to admit yet. And I'm so grateful for all of the amazing services that were just available to me in New York City for my time of dire need. I had massive PTSD, my kids had trauma. It was intense, but I had so many New York City services that were amazing. And that started, the very first step was the police.